Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Jacob Barker. I am joined by Mason Wood. This is the Outside Line Podcast. We are a dedicated motorsports podcast for NASCAR and briefly some IndyCar and Formula One. If you guys want us to go over some Formula One and IndyCar, please let us know. I am more than happy to go over that with Mason. But overall, we are mostly a NASCAR dedicated podcast. I write for Backsports page as well as Mason. So please follow us not only just at Backsports page, but on our social media sites. Please follow me at jwbarker24 on Twitter and Instagram. And Mason, what are your social media handles?
On Twitter, I am Mason Hollywood6, and then on Instagram, I am Mason.wood01. So if you want to check me out on there, we have post plenty of updates when it comes to podcasting, and also just throughout the race and stuff like that during the weekends. I'm also a football writer, so you'll see a lot of football stuff coming out of my pages as well.
Right, and we have plenty of ideas that are hopefully going to be coming out for the future for the site. You have your series, Untapped Potentials, that has been really expanding recently in the last couple of months or so, I'd say.
Yeah, we finally really picked up the pace on that. We've seen a lot of different types of baseball articles and hockey articles. Those teams have really picked up on the series. So if you guys want to check that out, it is in the drop-down menu under Featured on Backsports Page's website, so you can check everything out there. There will be some NASCAR Untapped Potential articles coming out over the next couple of months to kind of add to that as well. So that'll add a fifth sport to the series. So we're very excited about that. So be on the lookout for some NASCAR Untapped Potential articles as well. And Jacob, you have your own series that you've been working on as well, right?
Yes, I have my own series titled Championship Seasons that I came out about a couple weeks ago, I'd say. Basically covering, obviously, championship winning seasons. And it can be just, it doesn't have to be attributed to just NASCAR. It can be attributed to football, to the Kansas City Chiefs, the Green Bay Packers, anybody, hockey, baseball, whoever. Their story, there's so much stories that needs to be told behind the championship seasons. See these documentaries with America's Game on NFL Network. There's just so much detail that goes into a championship winning season for football and NASCAR that needs to be told. And that's what my series, Championship Seasons, is about. I recently came out, like I said, a couple weeks ago with Championship Seasons for Joey Logano on his 2022 championship winning season. Right now, I just wrapped up a championship season article for Kyle Larson. Hope to have that up on the website in just a couple days. And I've been having so many ideas for championship seasons, and like I said, I want it to expand to other sports, much like Untapped Potential, because I think it can be attributed to so many more sports, not just NASCAR or motorsports in general. Like I said, it can be go to football, baseball, wherever. The potentials are unlimited when it comes to a series like this.
Absolutely. There's a lot of room for growth there. And I think that a lot of our football writers really like the idea. So we're going to see a lot more of the championship seasons articles going up as well. For me, I know I'm going to be working on a Tony Stewart one here pretty quick. I've got 3 different championship seasons with him. He's my favorite driver. So I've got 3 championship seasons to pick from. Obviously, everybody knows about the 2011 one. Personally, I don't know much about the 2002 one. I'd want to do some research on
Really?
that. I was very young, so my recollection of it was like 2002. I was only a year old, so I don't know a ton about it. I've watched races in the past, but I have to do some more research on it. The 2005 one was interesting because I cried like a baby that night, not because he won the championship, but because I was so upset that he didn't win the race, and my dad had to try and explain to 4-year-old me that, like, he won the championship. It's okay. Well, I didn't understand that at the time. So the 2011 one was very special for me because I remember that. I remember where I was and the excitement,
Okay. That's actually pretty funny because 2009 was my first, at least from what I can remember, my first what I call full-time season of watching NASCAR as a kid. And I remember Jeff Gordon winning at Texas that year, and very vividly, I don't know why this stands out in my memory, was Kyle Busch winning his nationwide championship that year. Not Jimmy Johnson winning 4 straight championships that year, but Kyle Busch winning his nationwide championship. I have no idea why, but that just sticks out in my mind. Probably because I was by myself watching it,
Mm-hmm.
and my grandparents were doing something else, washing the dishes after dinner, and I was just watching the race by myself. I knew about it. I knew who Kyle Busch was, and I guess I thought that there was just more to, there just wasn't any more to winning the race. I didn't even think about the championship because I didn't know what a championship was at that time.
Yeah, no, definitely. I think I didn't start until like 2007, and all I remember at the time was like my dad had to go to work, and I remember like he was so mad he was missing the Daytona 500, so I was like, I'm gonna put it on and I'm gonna watch it, and that was my first race that I watched, and that was kind of the beginning of like I watched every race uh, at that point. Obviously, I missed some here or there, especially as I was getting older. Like I missed Tony Stewart's All-Star win was the same
Oh,
night as
jeez.
my birthday. I was like 13. I had all the boys over to play Call of Duty Black Ops, so I missed out on the win. But it was a great thing that when my dad came and told me and everything. But
Man, 2007. That was a great year and an awful year to be a Jeff Gordon fan because I'm obviously a huge Jeff Gordon fan. Have been since I was little. My
Mhm.
grandfather was a Jeff Gordon fan since he came up uh, through the sport, and should have won the championship that year, but won't get into that. You just gotta cherish the memories, much like with Tony Stewart, and
Mhm.
just gotta enjoy it. You know what I mean?
Oh yeah. Did you pick up on Gordon because your grandpa was a Gordon fan? Was that the main
Oh
reason?
yeah. So when I was little, there was like 3 or 4 drivers that I knew about. It was Jeff Gordon, Tony Stewart, Jimmy Johnson, and Kyle Busch. Those are the only 4 that I really knew about,
Mhm.
and I always just stuck. I just stuck with Jeff Gordon, and he didn't win as much obviously as he got older. That's probably just because the competition got younger, and Jimmy Johnson was there. We'll just say
Yeah,
that.
I hated
uh,
Johnson as a kid, man.
uh,
Now I love him. Like now I respect him, but back
I've
then couldn't.
I've always liked Jimmy Johnson. Maybe a little less in the 2007 to 2010 era, but from 2012 to 2020, I always liked them. But anyway, we won't get too much into our favorite drivers. We have a lot to talk about today. We're just coming off the Atlanta weekend. Interesting weekend to say the least. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, I would say it was a very interesting weekend, especially the truck and the Xfinity race was definitely a bag of randomness to say the least. And I felt like Sunday was much more
Yeah.
orderly and much better. Guys raced with a lot more respect, but we saw a lot of craziness that won't be forgotten, on Saturday.
And with the Cup Series side on Sunday, that's not a bad thing though,
Mm-mm.
because you know maybe it may have been a little boring at some points of the race. At least they're not tearing up equipment and wasting not only NASCAR's money but the team's money.
Well, yeah, and I think that Brad Keselowski pointed it out in his post-race interview that they really showed that they can, if they're orderly and they race each other with respect, they can have some clean finishes like that. So I think that honestly, after that, I think that a lot of drivers, it may stick with a lot of drivers, kind of how yesterday went. So we may see Talladega be a little bit different in that sense, where I mean, there
Right.
wasn't really obviously it's not a true restrictor plate track, but like I feel like a big one's very likely at Atlanta, and we didn't see one yesterday. We saw a couple, bigger incidents, but there were none that like were took out half the field or anything like that. I wonder
Right.
if when we
Right.
get to Talladega, if we'll see something kind of similar.
And well, go back to the last Talladega race in the fall. We had I guess what you would call one major on-track incident early in the first stage of that race, and the whole rest of the race was pretty much clean.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what? It was a great race. That Talladega race, it was a fantastic race. Had a side-by-side finish. You know, it may not have had to have that caution to set up the finish with Daniel Hemrick. It happened. It is what it is. But it was a great race. And Dale Jr. even said it. You don't have to have big, messy crashes at Daytona or Talladega to have a great race. And that includes Atlanta as well.
When I think a lot of the times, like there's a certain amount of cars that once they drop off, the race just is not as exciting that I always feel like, especially on those restrictor plate races. And especially with the Daytona 500 in recent years, it feels like you've got 13 cars that aren't junk, by the end of it.
Right.
So it's one of those things that if they can keep things clean, we're able to really see some of that 3-wide racing. I think back to the, like long time ago, but 2012 Talladega, right? I mean, 4 wide coming to the finish, that doesn't happen with a bunch of wrecks throughout the race. So when they can keep it clean and obviously there was a big wreck there, but when they can keep it clean and keep it orderly, you can get to the finish with 35, cars that are still running on the lead lap with not a ton of damage. So I think that's the biggest key is, the more cars in the race, the better that race is going to be 100% of the time. Because there's more room for runs. The lines can get going. We saw the top side work yesterday at certain points. We saw the bottom side work. It really just depended on who was put together and who had the most cars at that point. So I think, when we get to Talladega, things will be a little bit wider. So I think that there's definitely going to be a much bigger chance for one of those big wrecks, but I expect they'll keep it clean.
And that's the main difference between, Atlanta and Talladega and Daytona. Atlanta's a mile and a half. Now, granted, they did widen the track surface out, but not as great as Talladega or Daytona.
Mm-mm.
Talladega is super wide. They can, like you said, they can constantly run 4 wide at the time. And at Atlanta, they'd be lucky if they can run 3 wide constantly at the time.
Well, I think there's we've seen guys be able to run 3 wide kind of down the back straightaway, but it's really once you get into that tri-oval, it really narrows up, and especially with the the red and white line that they have down there, you don't have as much room with like the apron because that cuts off half the apron, so you lose a lot of room down that apron that could be used, and I think that is why we see a lot of those 3 wide. Somebody's going to hit the wall coming off of turn 4 because there's just not enough room there for that to work, and everybody did not have to severely check up. You know what I mean? There's a lot of give or take that you had to give there in those scenarios.
Right, and it almost reminds me of Charlotte because when you're looking from the grandstands, you can see how when you're coming off of turn 4 on the front straightaway, you can see how they're how basically narrows on the front straightaway. You can visibly see that if you go to Charlotte on the front straightaway, like whether it be the Coke 600 or the Roval, you can visibly see it, how it just narrows down. I don't know how much, but if just one slight mistake, even if you think about it, like go back to the Charlotte or the Coca-Cola 600 last year when you saw Chris Buescher flip on the front straightaway last year. That was, I wouldn't say it was completely due to the narrowness of the front straightaway, but I would say that it played a little bit of a factor because Suarez got tight, came up into, I think it was Briscoe who I got into the back of Suarez after he got tight and then caused a melee. And, it's just one of those deals where you got to be super careful, even with the new car, because we got drivers getting concussions, such as Kurt Busch and Alex Bowman last year. Just got to be cautious, but, some of these drivers don't know the definition of cautious. And, it's not, like I said, it's not a safe sport, but this is why we have safety measures for these reasons, right?
Yeah, I mean, I've mentioned it before. It's kind of like with football. Is a lot of the times these guys that come in, they don't understand exactly what could happen. They don't really understand the consequences because we're not having a lot of those. It's not 2001 where we're seeing a lot of driver injuries and stuff like that, guys having to be taken out of the car, and stuff like that. So it's not as put under the spotlight. And I think over the last year, we've seen, the Alex Bowman concussion, obviously Kurt Busch still not cleared to race almost a year later. So there's so much that we've seen since then that I think it kind of sticks in drivers' minds a little bit. So they're a little bit more cautious of the way they race, obviously, but if your name's not Ross Chastain, maybe you're not as cautious, but hey, it wasn't his fault. I'm not going to sit here and say it was entirely his fault. Okay. He didn't touch him. Clint was honest on the broadcast. He didn't touch him. Never touched him.
No,
the air moves very quickly on these restricted plate tracks.
100%. And even with the new car, I texted my friend right after it happened. I was like, well, he said it wasn't his fault. I'm like, I don't know. And then they showed the replay of the zoom in camera where he never touched him. I'm like, huh.
Well, and you can
never
see
touched him.
Somebody found a close-up shot of obviously when these guys get out of the gas kind of in the corner, you can see the flames come out of the side. And Harvick got out of the gas right before it. Yeah, he got out of the gas right before it. He must have gotten loose, tried to pick it up, and then that was when Chastain came up. And obviously Chastain didn't touch him, but it was kind of reminiscent of what we saw a lot, I feel like, with like the Gen 6, like 2017, 2018, where if you move too sporadically on somebody's bumper, even without touching them, the air just sends them. And that's kind of what it felt like, with the combination of him it was the perfect combination of Harvick let up and Chastain was coming with a run, and the air, he moved ever so slightly across the rear end, and obviously Harvick went around and, there's a few good cars in that incident. Josh Berry was involved in that one, I'm pretty sure.
Yeah, he front end was destroyed. That took Harvick out. Buescher was done for the day, I believe. A couple other guys. Speaking of videos being posted online, we have two separate videos that were posted post race. One of Eric Jones just going on a warpath from, I think it was 19th to 8th or something like that, 17th to 8th. He got a top 10 out of the race, which was awesome. So shout out to Eric Jones. That was awesome. And Alex Bowman and Ross Chastain having a few verbal words after the race. Did you see that video?
I did not see that.
So NASCAR originally posted it on their Twitter account, but took it down for some reason. I just saw the video a couple hours ago, and I don't know exactly what Bowman was upset about, or even if he was just or if he was upset at all, or if they were just talking about if the bumps were too aggressive or stuff like that. But there's a video on Twitter of Bowman and Ross Chastain having a little bit of a verbal exchange while Chastain is still in the car. So just wanted to throw that out there. Got a little, I wouldn't call them tempers, but
Interesting.
It's extremely interesting. But enough of that. Joey Logano finally gets his Atlanta win. I'd say that's a long time coming, whether it's on the new track or not, because he may not have had the best luck at Atlanta in the past, but I would still say it's been a long time coming because he's been racing at that track ever since his father got him into racing on the quarter mile.
Yeah, and we've seen Logano be very solid on some of the mile and a halves, especially with his time at Penske. And so we've seen him have good runs, and it just never, he always seems to fade in the back half of the race on a lot of those Atlanta races, especially on the old configuration. So for him, it looked very dire, towards the end of that race. And, he just kind of stuck with it on the bottom there. And, which to me was a surprising move because that was not the lane to go. I mean, the bottom was stalling those, final 8 laps. And then Bell made that move. And then as soon as he hopped back up top, the energy had already gone back down to the bottom. So that was what kind of gave Logano that opportunity. And then obviously, I saw somebody mention it on Twitter, the block that, Brad threw, and he probably could have thrown it a little harder. And I heard somebody say that, Logano definitely would have thrown it a little harder, but obviously not trying to wreck in front of the field. And it was a great pass. Logano went up as high as he could. I mean, he was almost up in the wall trying to get around him, and he just had to run.
It's one of those. It's definitely was one of those plate track finishes where you either come back with a checker flag or you come back with the steering wheel. So, if Keselowski doesn't throw the block enough, or if he throws it too hard, he's either going into the fence or coming across the checker flag. Right.
Well, I think 100%. I think too, if this was Penske Brad Keselowski, I think he throws that block. But this is owner Brad Keselowski. He's got to pay a little extra money if he throws that block and ends up in the fence. I think, obviously these are race car drivers and they want to win at all times. But I definitely think he's probably a little bit more cautious with his race car. And that he's been in that position before. How many times has Brad been turned in front of the field on a plate track like that? So I think he recognized that and said, let me, they had a great finish out of it. And he mentioned it, the wins are going to come. The wins are going to come for that team. They just got to keep with the good finishes. And you can see the improvement, especially in his race team. You can see the improvement in that 6 team. And they mentioned it on the broadcast. The 6 has not won since David Reagan back in 2011. I think that's going to change here pretty quick.
I actually remember that race. And that was 12 years ago. I actually remember that race. Jeff Gordon got turned with I don't know what it was, 3 laps to go off of the nose of Mark Martin when Vickers and Logano, they got squeezed in the wall. It was a little bit of chaos, caution, and then came back to finish 6th after drafting with Kyle Busch of all people. That's one of those, because it was a July 4th weekend. I think that's probably why it sticks out in my mind, because he had the Pepsi Max car with the black flames and the blue the sky blue border on the flames.
One of my favorites.
Yeah, great car. That was a good race from what I remember, because it was still the era of the two car tandem draft, which I don't think we'll ever see again.
I think there was a lot of predictions about it, but it hasn't really turned out that way.
No. And that's one thing. That's one of the things that we thought was going to happen with the next gen car, but I don't think we'll ever see that style of tandem drafting again.
Well, I think it played its role, during its time with the series, but I think that especially over the last few years, we've seen some very, very solid racing out of some of these packages. I mean, I'm for one, I'm a fan. As much as it caused a lot of big wrecks, if things could have been kept clean, the big run package that we ran a few years ago, from 2018 to 2020, I always thought put on some really solid, restrictor plate racing. But these races feel, very, when they keep it clean, it can feel kind of old school at times. It's just with Atlanta, we've talked about it, very small. So the opportunities for passing just aren't there. And that's why I'm so excited for Talladega, because I just feel like it's going to have sort of that old school feeling over at Talladega this year.
And that's another thing, is that it was extremely hard to pass, even though it was a drafting race, because there just wasn't enough momentum to get the bottom lane going from the middle lane.
Yeah, and especially because you need so many cars in the lane to get it going, and nobody was bold enough to say, I'm going to hop in the middle and try and make this middle lane work, because by the time they got to turn 3, they're like, I need to get out of this before we get to the exit of the corner. So it just especially like right on those not perfectly D-shaped ovals, like when you go to Kansas and stuff like that, it's a lot wider when you come off of the corner, but when you have that really strict, tight tri-oval that you see at Atlanta, that you see at Charlotte, as you mentioned. It gets so thin in there, and you have to have. That's where I think we see a lot of the handling come in, because it's almost like you're almost drifting it around there with how fast they're going. So that's where a lot of the handling kind of came in, and I loved what Tony Stewart said on the broadcast about how much less they were bouncing around in the car. I don't know if you watched qualifying and stuff this weekend, but like Christopher Bell was bouncing around in that car like it was a VR ride at Dave & Buster's, you know.
I saw the video of it, and he looked exactly like how Lewis Hamilton was bouncing around in the car last year at Bahrain in testing. It was that severe.
And they, I mean, whopping changes since that qualifying run, because you saw it in the in-car cam yesterday. I mean, he was very comfortable. You didn't see him bouncing around, and obviously, like if you're bouncing around like that in the middle of the pack, I think that's where you see a lot of those big wrecks, because guys get loose, and we saw a lot of moments. Kyle Larson had a moment where he got got loose, had to there was a lot of different moments throughout the race. Guys getting loose, got stepped out, and then you lose 5 or 6 spots just because you got a little bit loose. Got out of the groove a little bit. So you had to be on point at all times, and your car had to have that. You had to have handling along with speed, and I think that's where they can get that old school kind of feel. That old school feel where it was you had to have the speed and you had to have the handling. You really felt that yesterday, because those guys that had the speed, in qualifying, struggled really mightily in the race. So the guys that had the good handling were there when they needed to be.
Right, and like Boyer said yesterday, you just have to find that balance with speed and handling. And I feel like with the cool weather yesterday, I kind of feel like that has something to do with there not being enough runs, because it wasn't like last spring race where the weather was warmer, and we pretty much saw side-by-side action last spring for most, if not the entire race, from what I remember.
Yeah, and I think that I think that a lot of what the Xfinity race and the truck race, all those guys watched that this weekend, and people were tweeting that the Xfinity race was an embarrassment to the sport, and I think that every single one of those guys thought about that and said, look, we cannot go in and just start wrecking like crazy. And so that's where you get some of these, plate style races where they line up single file and they're cool with riding that out. And especially in these handling races, I feel like every single one of these races where the handling matters so much, you're going to get a chunk of that where guys just want to know what their car's like. And especially those guys that are further back, they want to know what it's like with the air, when they're further, because obviously they talked about the further back you get in the pack, the worse your car's going to handle. So I think that there's a lot of learning that happens just in that amount of time. So for us as an audience, it may not be the most interesting thing, but for them as drivers, it's probably, that's where they learn a ton about their race car and what changes.
It's the safest option.
Yeah. And when it gives them a second to breathe and say, okay, this is what I need, because, you're pushing so hard. Obviously you read Tyler Reddick's heart rate monitor when they're going in that pack, when it's 2x2, when they get 3 wide a little bit, he's up there at 130, 129, 135, his heart rate is up there. And then they showed him later on just in the single file line, and he was at like 100, like very calm. Just, it allows them to say, okay, this is what I need with my race car. Because like sometimes when you get in there and you're working really hard, you don't think about it. You're just like, I need to get through and at least get in a clearing, so I'm not side by side with somebody. And I think that's where they just say, okay, here's kind of what I need with my race car. The right rear's chattering a little bit. We need to make some air pressure adjustments. That sort of things where they can really, really tell, especially when you get further back in the pack.
And speaking of Tyler Reddick, shout out to Tyler Reddick on the 5th place finish while being very sick with a stomach bug, I believe.
Yeah, they had John Hunter Nemechek on standby.
Yeah, and I didn't think he was going to get through it, but hey, the man got through it, got a top 5 out of it. I think that's extremely impressive.
Oh, absolutely. And it's a huge plus that he didn't throw up with the stomach bug. I mean, Noah Gragson throws up regularly in the car, so
all the time.
Yeah, so it's a pretty big accomplishment. I mean, we've seen a lot of drivers get sick in the cars, and we've seen Carl Edwards throw up all over all over his windshield. So we've seen drivers get sick. But for him to be able to hang on and he was kind of, a guy that was, he was stuck in the mid-teens, I feel like, throughout a decent portion of the day. And then he figured it out, midway through stage 2, and they had kind of pushed up, and he was a factor for that entire final stage. He just wasn't in, he didn't expect the move from Bell when Bell made the move. I don't think he, obviously didn't expect it. And he just kind of, at that point, he had to just kind of ride it out with where he was.
Yeah. And I completely agree. And if I'm not mistaken, first top 5 finish with 23 XI for Tyler Reddick, and hopefully just getting some luck on his side, because he's had a rough year already.
Yeah, they've struggled a little bit, and we've seen, obviously, it's early in the season, so things are going to happen, and now's the time to deal with the struggles. But as the season goes on, they're going to start to pick it up, and I think this is kind of what they needed as far as a momentum turner, just to kind of get things turned around. And I think he'll be solid the next couple of weeks. I think he'll be a factor in these next upcoming races, and especially, COTA, we've seen him be good on these road courses, especially last season. So we're going to really see if that's going to translate this weekend, but a lot of stiff competition. But we'll talk about that in a little bit, because there's a big can of worms with COTA coming up this weekend.
We'll get to that in a second. Logano, 150 laps led, I believe, over half the race. Stage 1 winner, stage 2 winner, Austin Cindric. Pure Penske dominance. Could we see more of that throughout the season, not only on the plate tracks, but more on the intermediate and short tracks?
I definitely think we could see a lot more of Penske good runs out of Penske, but I think a lot of it's going to come down to their consistency. I think there were some points, especially in the regular season last year, Logano would have some weeks where he was really good, and then he'd have 3-4 straight weeks where they were 20th and out. And I think that, they won the championship last year, but that's what he's thinking about, as far as like, we need to focus on having a little bit more consistency. And, with how good Chevrolet's been running, it's really hard to see them step up and all of a sudden start dominating. But I definitely think that Ford's going to be a factor. And with how poorly SHR has ran outside of Kevin Harvick, I think that they're the flagship team with Ford. They have been for a while. That's going to continue again this year. And really, it comes down to in my opinion, it comes down to when does Ryan Blaney win a race? Because he's been fast. And it's going to happen.
It's been a long time. Not since
something races, I think they said.
Yeah, maybe not 100. Not since August of 2021 at Daytona.
So it's been I think they said 60 races. It was, but it's been a while since he's won. He's got 7 career wins. It's been a little while since, he's been in victory lane, but he's had a lot of speed, and they talked about it a little bit in the post-race show yesterday. But when you have that much speed, the win will come eventually. It's just going to take a little bit of time for him. So, they're headed in the right direction, but how long have we been saying that about him? 2 years now. So
yeah,
it'll come together.
I feel like that discussion about the win can be said for the entire Hendrick Motorsports campaign as well, because I've been seeing, multiple, I don't know what to call them, troll accounts on social media saying, Kyle Larson's washed up. Oh, he choked away, easy win at Phoenix. That's just racing. It's just racing. It happens. William Byron got his 2 wins in a row at Las Vegas and Phoenix. Great. Good for William Byron. That's awesome. Larson will get his win. Chase, once he comes back, will more than likely get his win, make it to the playoffs if he is granted a medical waiver. Don't see why he wouldn't be. And then Bowman will get his win. I think Bowman will win Dover.
I think it's a very good possibility that Bowman could win Dover. I think we've seen Bowman be really, really solid. I think he's just, it's been a quiet solid. I think he's been, it hasn't been talked about much, but he's kind of been up there. He starts out the race, up front, and they always fall back a little bit, but I feel like he's always sitting kind of right outside the top 10, right out, 12th, 13th, which is definitely an improvement upon where he kind of was last year at this point in the season, where he was running 17th, 18th, 21st. I mean, they've significantly improved at some tracks that maybe he hasn't been the best at. So there's a lot of more room for growth, but he's been very solid. And I think, he's going to have a good rest of the season. Probably, I expect every single Hendrick driver ends up with a win by the end of the year. I think Chase will come out and he'll win pretty quickly. I think he'll be ready to go.
I'd say so.
I think he'll be ready to go. I think he'll be well rested. Obviously, they want him back around Coke 600 time, which obviously biggest test of the season, on his leg is longest race of the year. But there's a lot of good things that are going to happen for Hendrick. Obviously, they had the penalty over the last week. There's been a lot of interesting stuff with the penalty. Obviously, Chad Knaus was kind of alluded to the fact that, maybe these parts weren't fitted correctly by NASCAR. Like he basically said, if I pull it off the shelf, just how NASCAR gave it to us, they would deem it illegal. So that's a very big topic that could really reduce that penalty down, because it's a significant penalty, especially for not running them. Especially for not running them in the race. They were caught in practice after, they had checked the car, said nothing was wrong with it, came back 40 minutes later, said, we got to take these. And just for that big of a penalty for something that wasn't raced. And I know a lot of people say, well, if NASCAR wouldn't have found it, then it wouldn't have been, they would have ran it in the race. But obviously it didn't matter because Hendrick still walked away with the victory anyways.
And that's the thing you got to remember. If Hendrick is that good with, said illegal parts, just think how good they are with, just regular parts, even with the new aero package.
Yeah, they've been really, really solid, with the parts that they've been given. And I think it'll be, moving forward, it'll be interesting to see how all the appeals go and everything. Cause, if it's deemed that, the part was sent wrong by NASCAR or something like that, there's, going to be some major apologies that are going to have to be given out.
Yeah. So now that we discussed that, do you think, with everything in the media coming out, the past, 5 days or so with the Hendrick Motorsports appeal and the penalty, do you think it warrants another look from NASCAR at a possible reduction in the penalty?
I definitely think so. I think that it's especially with some of the facts that have been, not the facts, but some of the things that have been thrown out by different people regarding, and to be fair, Hendrick, at least from our perspective, was very transparent in their talks with NASCAR. They were very clear and everything. Jeff Gordon was very clear right after the race, because they asked him right after the race last week. And it was sad that was a talking point, because it was a thing that was ran in practice. And, obviously I understand NASCAR wants to set a precedent not to mess with these parts and stuff like that. But that's a big blow for something that never made it out on the racetrack with 40 cars out there as well. So I think it could definitely get reduced, because it's just tough when throw the Denny Hamlin penalty in there as well. It's tough when so many, that's 5-6 guys who's, that's 5 guys right there. 6 if you count Justin Haley, but he's not, a championship caliber team. But those 5 other teams, those guys all are championship caliber teams. And it's just, that's a big penalty that you're going to be feeling for the entire rest of the season, taking away the playoff points. William Byron is going to feel that, because he may only get 1 more win the rest of the regular season, maybe 2 more wins. And he's going to have half as many playoff points as somebody who's going to enter the regular or the playoffs with 4 or 5 wins. And that's going to play a factor, especially for William Byron, who has had to rely on those playoff points a lot at his time in the playoffs.
He just managed to scrape through to get to the round of 8 last year.
Exactly. All of those Hendrick drivers,
go ahead.
All of those Hendrick drivers minus Larson and Elliott. So basically Bowman and Byron both have relied heavily on playoff points, because they're, it feels like, in the round of 12 and the round of 8, it feels like every time we go to the Charlotte Roval, either Byron or Bowman is on the dang bubble and has to pull out a clutch performance.
Yep.
And, Bowman seems to usually pull out those clutch performances, especially at the Roval. It just depends on what's given to him. But ultimately, those playoff points are going to come back to haunt them if there's no reduction to this penalty. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree with that. And that's the thing that bothers me about it, is that I get the points, the drivers and owner points, but the playoff points is what really bothers me about the penalty. Because like you said, that's kind of what, Byron and Bowman rely on to get to where they are in the playoffs. We've seen Byron be pretty consistent in the early stages of the season. All of his wins since 2021, his first 5 wins have come in the first, I don't know, what would you say, first 10 races since 2021. And he hasn't won what I would call the late race season since his first career win at Daytona in 2020. So, like you said, Bowman and Byron rely on the playoff points, which no driver should have to, I'd say. But this is the way that the format is set up, and it stinks. It is what it is. And like you said, it's unfortunate. It's just, like I said, it's what bothers me with the penalties. If you're going to have such a severe penalty on a team, I just don't want to see those hard-earned playoff points be taken away just like that. That's my only issue with the penalty. Now, if they do reduce the penalty, I'd say, and this is my personal call, obviously not affiliated with NASCAR, but this is my personal call. If they do reduce the penalty, I'd say that they would reduce the driver and owner points by half, so they would only take away 50 points. And then, and this might be a little too generous now that I've said this, and then give back the 10 playoff points to each driver, and then suspend the crew chiefs for the next 2 races. So basically, split the entire original penalty in half. That's what I would do.
Yeah, I think that would be the best move overall. I just, NASCAR's had a lot of issues over the last few years with judgment calls, and obviously, I talked about the Hail Melon. They made that a rule, and as much as I agree with it, it's now another, especially when we go to Darlington or something like that, that's another judgment call. And so NASCAR's had that big issue with judgment calls and stuff like that. So with this, I mean, there's a lot to it, and I just don't think that by the end of the season they want to be feeling like, they don't want the topic to be, Chase Elliott misses the playoffs by just a couple points because
of the penalty,
right? Or Alex Bowman misses the round of 8 because they put louvers on the car or lovers, however you say it. Is it louvers, right?
I think it's louvers.
Louvers, okay, yeah. So they put louvers on the car all the way back in March in a practice session, and then they're going to feel that all the way in October and November when things count the most. I just don't feel like that's fair, especially in this day and age of a reset when you get to the playoffs. Let's not mess with the playoffs.
Right.
You want it to be a clean reset, that's fine. Then the regular season is the regular season. The playoffs are the playoffs. Don't start taking away points when we get to the playoffs. Take them away now, make it harder for them to get into the playoffs. But to take away playoff points, you have now infected the entire playoff system in March. I mean, we're going to feel it in March. Like that's kind of my issue with it. Is
6 months before the playoffs start.
You have already as Rick Allen would say, playoff implications in March. In March, it's just, we're not even to the end of March. It's halfway through March. It's so early in the season. We're going to race 6 this weekend? Yeah, round 6 at COTA. I mean, it's still so early. After this weekend, there's 30 races to go, and we've already got playoff implications. I mean, I disagree with it,
Yep. Okay. Now that that's over, even more, and this is being recorded on Monday before, and I want to say that before I start this next piece, Josh Williams, and this may be why the Xfinity race is being called an embarrassment. I didn't get to watch too much of the Xfinity race, but I saw when I got done with work on Saturday evening, I saw the clip of Josh Williams parking his car on the start-finish line, and it was trending. And I mean trending. And I saw the video of him talking to the official about being fined or something like that, and then him going into the hauler. And he was in the hauler for, 2 hours or so?
I think they said almost 2.5, 3 hours he sat there.
Basically about the rest of the Xfinity race.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you expect? Now I'm going to say my part first. If there probably more than likely will be penalties for Josh Williams. We've never seen this before, so we don't know how to judge this. If there is going to be a penalty or not. But if there is, I would say at least a 2-race suspension and maybe $75,000. And I can't think of points right now because I mean I don't know if it really matters to Josh at this point. But would you say that's fair if there are penalties for Josh Williams, 2 races and $75,000?
I think that could definitely be a possibility. And I think, look, from his perspective, I can't necessarily say I blame him because,
no.
I watched every green flag lap of that first stage of the race, and I only had the race on my TV for maybe a total of 5 minutes. I mean, that's how bad the first stage was for the Xfinity series. And him, parking it up front, I think, he had a piece of debris come off the car. And at that point, NASCAR was, he had a piece of bear bond come off the car. And at that point, NASCAR was so fed up with all of the cautions that in Williams' eyes, they were just kind of, they were fed up with everything. They weren't happy with the fact that they had ran 4 green flag laps and 40 laps. And so they finally just told him to park it because we can't deal with that crap. And in his eyes, it was like, under a normal circumstance, had this been a long green flag run, this wouldn't have been an issue. So I think it goes back to that. And I think that it really depends. I'd have to really check the rule book. I'm sure Bob Pockris has posted the portion of the rule book somewhere on Twitter. But it would really come down to that, because if NASCAR was kind of quick to do that simply because they were annoyed about cautions and stuff like that, then obviously there's still going to be a fine. But I think that you could see maybe a higher fine, but maybe not the suspension. I think you could see, a $250,000 fine, but not a suspension. They may really try to make a point, but not suspend him as well. I think that's a possibility, but suspension's out there as well. It really comes down to how wrong does NASCAR think they handled the situation. And because obviously we've seen in the last, year, we talk about the All-Star race last year, NASCAR makes mistakes and they try to make them up. And sometimes it's not always in the best way. This one could be really easy. You just fine him and you call it a day. And obviously he had to sit for 3 hours in the, in NASCAR jail, as Eric Estep called it. And so, that's really what I think, it just depends on how wrong does NASCAR think they were in the scenario. If they feel that they were 100% right to park him in that moment, then yeah, you may see a, suspension and they really might put down the hammer. But I think if you're Josh Williams, you're at least a little concerned after seeing all the penalties last week. You're at least like, dang, like they're pissed off. I pissed them off even more And he doesn't care. He's like, oh well, he made a point. He got probably more his sponsor on TV more by getting out of the car than he would have probably staying in the race, because they probably at some point would have been involved in one of the big wrecks that would have officially taken him out. And with Bearbon on the car, and you're running in the back of the pack, you're not going to get talked about much. So he got his sponsor time on Saturday. That's for sure.
And I completely agree with that. And I swear I saw a tweet from the sponsor saying that we completely support Josh Williams, and that's cool. I'm all for it. And you saw even saw drivers support Josh Williams through social media. I think I even saw Denny Hamlin say that if there is a fine, he'll pay it for him.
Yeah, he told Josh Williams to come on the podcast on Actions Detrimental. So
yeah, and so that was recorded today, I believe, and I think he's even going to be on Dale Jr. Download.
I heard that. I think I heard that was a possibility. I know DBC said something about it as well. Door Bumper Clear had messaged, or not messaged, but quote tweeted like what Denny Hamlin said. Like, we know another podcast you can stop by on as well. So,
hey, he's getting his moment of fame. I'm all for it. It may not be a fantastic moment, but like you said, sponsor time, stuff like that, and I can understand his frustration, and obviously it is completely frustrating because I'd say is an underfunded team, definitely an underfunded team.
Yeah,
and those guys work way too hard to have a race end like that, and that's kind of the same thing where that Spire can be put into that conversation, because they've been an underfunded team for years and they're just really getting things going. They had a 4th place finish with Corey LaJoie on Sunday, which is a great run for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you see these are those opportunities. These are the races for those smaller teams to kind of have those opportunities. Mm-hmm. And so when that gets taken away because of something like that, especially in a race where cars were wrecking out left and right in that Xfinity race. Yeah. It was shaping up to, obviously there was a few cars at the end that were not junked, but in a car that wasn't junked won. But you have, just surviving, you put yourself in that a good position. You can end up with a top 15 finish. And for Josh Williams, NASCAR basically said, we're not allowing you to do that. And he basically gave him the middle finger right back. So
without actually giving them the middle finger, which is I'd say
very Kyle Busch-esque, like young Kyle Busch-esque sort of thing.
He at least gave him the peace sign.
Yeah, very Kyle Busch-esque back in his days.
Okay, so enough about Atlanta. I feel like we've recapped about pretty much all there is. So let's look forward to Circuit of the Americas this weekend. All 3 series are heading there. Bunch of notable entries for all 3 series, especially in the Cup Series, which is going to be stacked on Sunday, which I am extremely excited for. And it'll be even more interesting to see how the new aero package works on a road course for the first time, as well as the choose cone rule.
Yeah, I think the choose cone, is going to be a big factor. And we also get to see there will not be cautions at the end of stages. And I think that's going to be a big one as well.
That's going to be huge.
Mm-hmm. And I think that if it works well, it's possible you see that in other areas. It's been talked about getting rid of those kind of cautions. So you could see that in other areas if it races well this weekend.
Yeah, and I'm one of those that doesn't mind cautions at the end of the stage, but my problem with it is that it obviously eats up green flag laps.
Correct.
And but it does give the teams that get a chance to work on their race cars, get a pit stop, and it's kind of like a free competition caution, but where you can actually put fuel in the car. That's how I perceive those stage breaks.
Yeah, and I think that especially with these being on the road courses, I feel like it's just going to feel very kind of old school with how road courses used to run, and it would just you have these really really long green flag, runs where guys that take care of their tires, they don't get the tires too hot, that you're really going to see that, and I think that there's going to be obviously some restarts at some point during the race, and it's just going to kind of come down to those guys that are better on the restarts that are able to kind of jump out there. I think it's going to be a 2-3 car. I think we're going to see something, maybe not as exciting as last year, but I think we'll see a similar finish. And with how big the entry list is, I mean, anything can happen this weekend. I'm not ruling out any of those guys winning a race this weekend. I mean, it's possible. It's going to be an insane weekend with, I think, 4 or 5 different I think it's all F1 drivers racing. I think there's a couple IndyCar, right?
So for this weekend, the drivers we were talking about for the number 9 who will be subbing in for Chase Elliott this weekend will be IMSA sports car champion Jordan Taylor, who will also be driving at Le Mans this year for Hendrick Motorsports, which is going to be awesome.
Yeah, he's been very involved with their Garage 56 stuff.
Yes. Jensen Button, 2009 F1 world champion, will be driving the 15 for Rick Ware Racing this weekend. Connor Daly will be racing the 50 for, I guess that is the money team. I guess they are making another start this weekend, which is cool. Mm-hmm. Jimmy Johnson, 7-time Cup Series champion in the 84 for Petty, as I still call him, not Legacy Motor Club. I mean, come on. I still think of them as Petty GMS, but fans have their own names as they want to call their race teams.
Yeah.
And then Kimi Räikkönen, 2007 F1 world champion, making his second Cup Series start for Project 91 for Trackhouse. And Justin Marks has been saying in interviews recently he wants to get more drivers in Project 91 this year, which is awesome. I think it's great for the sport. So for me, who's been into F1 for a couple of years, I would really like to see Daniel Ricciardo in a Cup car sometime. And it doesn't have to be on an oval. It can be, I don't know where a good place Ricciardo would be for Ricciardo. Trying to think, go through our road course schedule. Maybe if they still had Road America on the list, I think he'd be good at. But they obviously sniped that for the Chicago Street Course in July. But things happen. But if we do see Daniel Ricciardo in a Cup Series car, I feel like it would be at Circuit of the Americas next year.
Yeah, I think he could definitely be a part of. He could probably slide right into Project 91. I think Kimi's going to have a great weekend this weekend, especially because he's a track he's far more comfortable with than a track he knows much better than Watkins Glen. He's going to be pretty comfortable, and I think that a lot of these guys look at COTA and they're like, all right, that's our chance. We're very comfortable with that track, and that's an opportunity where, especially early on, when we've only been there one other time, the more times we go there, the better these guys are going to get there. So this is that opportunity for a lot of those F1 guys to say, I've got a little bit of a step up. I've raced here many, many times before. So this is their opportunity to really, take advantage of the fact that they are very comfortable with the racetrack. They know how the racetrack can change in all sorts of conditions.
Yeah, and I completely agree with that. I think Kimi's going to do a lot better than how he did at Watkins Glen last season. Did end up getting into on-track incident that brought out a caution and ended his day about halfway through the race, from what I remember. I think he could have pulled out a top 15 if he kept it clean last year. I'm expecting since this is the site of his last F1 win, and like you said, better track for him that he knows way more than Watkins Glen. I could say top 15 is definitely in the possibility. Top 10 maybe if everything just goes right for Kimi.
I'd be bold enough to say top 10. I have a strong feeling he'll be in, and especially without the stage breaks, it's going to be these long runs, and especially when you're racing and in any other series. I mean, tires are very, very important, just as important in NASCAR. Then Kimi's going to know exactly how to keep his tires cool, and he's going to, I think, especially on those long runs. I think you'll see, kind of like we see Kevin Harvick every week, his car will really pick it up in the long run. I think if we finish out with a long green flag run, Kimi may, start on the final restart 15th, but I think on a long green flag run, you could see him, push it up to finish, maybe 8th or something like that, just depending on how long the run goes. I think with more restarts, the further back he may fall. Like if the run, goes longer, I think you're going to see, Kimi really pick up the pace, especially towards the end of the race.
And like I said, I completely agree with you. It's going to be interesting to watch to see. And we have 2 Formula One world champions and a 7-time NASCAR Cup Series champion in the field this weekend. That'll be very interesting to see, because if you told somebody in 2019 that Kimi Räikkönen, Jimmy Johnson, and Jenson Button were going to be in the same race at Circuit of the Americas, they would have said you're crazy.
Yeah, it's definitely cool to see all these guys kind of coming over, and it's exciting to have Jimmy Johnson back this weekend. I know I was excited to see him out at the Daytona 500, and for him to get a chance at COTA. I think it'll be interesting. And we've seen that these road courses, anything can happen. Who knows where Jimmy Johnson ends up? I mean, I imagine he's probably a little bit better road racer now than he was back, when he was racing back then. But obviously there'll be a learning curve. But I think, he's another guy that I expect to have a good run. And at the expense, I think what it comes down to is we say Kimi's going to have a good run. I think Jimmy Johnson can have a good run at the expense of who? Who has a poor run this weekend? Who kind of drops the ball? I think that there's quite a few guys that could. I feel like we could see Ross Chastain, get into it with somebody at some point running, 8th, 9th, and end up in the tire barrier somewhere, and just, a lot can happen this weekend. And there's going to be a couple guys that have really, really rough weekends to go along with some of those guys who are going to have really, really good weekends, and a lot to be proud of after this weekend. So it's going to be a mixed bag. And I feel like every week we've seen guys who are happy with the way they've placed and guys who are heartbroken each and every week this season. Next week's going to continue that trend as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I feel like Sunday may be, probably will be, a great opportunity for Kyle Larson to finally get a win on the season, because he's been really close, obviously, at Phoenix and Las Vegas. And I'm trying to remember. No, he got wrecked last year is what happened, and finished second in the first race at COTA in 2021. And he's actually a really good road racer. Won 3 of the 7 road races that we had in 2021, and then won at Watkins Glen last season. So probably good opportunity for Kyle Larson to, I don't know what you would call it, just get rid of the bridesmaid dress as a maybe, and just get that win, finally get over that little bit of a hump. But this is Kyle Larson we're talking about. He's going to get a win. Hendrick will be fine. We talked about it earlier. Really don't have to worry too much, but there's always that doubt in your mind if you're going to win again. And like I said, Sunday could be a great opportunity for not only for Larson, but for plenty of other drivers.
Yeah, I think you could see a lot of drivers. I mean, this is their chance to really turn things around. I think we've seen a lot of craziness to kind of start the last few weeks, and a lot of guys who have had a lot of issues and stuff like that. And this is a very good track where, you know, speed obviously matters, but there's a lot of skill that goes into what's coming up on Sunday. So, you know, you can have a fast car, but if you're not skilled at what you're doing on the track, especially here at COTA, you're gonna, you know, that's gonna be felt. So we're gonna really see who picks it up. And I'll be honest, I think one of my kind of sleeper picks for this weekend that I think is going to run really well is Daniel Suarez. I think Daniel is going to have a very solid run. We've seen, you know, Trackhouse be solid at COTA, especially with, you know, the first win last year with Ross Chastain. So, you know, I think you know, Suarez got his first win last year, and I think, you know, you'll see him running up there, you know, towards the front at the road course. You know, whether or not he finishes up front is going to be kind of the question, but I definitely think, you know, at some point in stage 1 or 2, you're gonna be hearing his name battling it out for, you know, second, third, fourth place up there.
Yeah, I agree. It'll be interesting to see how not only Suarez does on Sunday, but how some of the more experienced and more well-known road course racers do on Sunday. You know, like Michael McDowell, he's really good on road courses. Well, 2021, I believe he was running up front at some of the road courses that we had that year, and could have had plenty more good finishes. Just wasn't able to get it done, unfortunately. But you know, Mike McDowell, Daniel Suarez, Kyle Larson, a couple other guys that we can watch, such as Kimi Räikkönen. It's going to be, I don't know what other word you can use other than chaos, but it's going to be pretty chaotic on Sunday.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, you're going to have plenty of, you know, a slew of guys who don't have really anything to lose. They're there to win a race, and that is it.
Yeah.
You know, they don't have to worry about points. So you're going to see that come into effect at some point during the race as well. And, you know, it's going to be, it's a day for, you know, guys like Michael McDowell to have a really solid day in points. It's just about, you know, how good are they going to be this weekend with all of the competition that's going to be there. There's so much parity in the Cup Series. There's a lot of competition on a weekly basis anyways. Throw in a couple of, you know, F1 champions and a 7-time champion there. I mean, yeah, you're right. It's going to be a wild Sunday at Circuit of the Americas in Austin, Texas.
Yeah, no pressure for guys like Cindric or Ty Gibbs, right?
Yeah, I feel like for them, they want to have good runs, but there's a lot of eyeballs in a lot of other areas that they can, you know, kind of like you saw with Ty Gibbs yesterday, just quietly sneak their way into the top 10 and have a good run without anybody really noticing. I think is what you'll see. I don't know if you know, I don't think Cindric is. I think Cindric could compete towards the end of the race, but in reality, I think he's going to be a fringe kind of top 10 driver, and I think you could see Ty Gibbs up there as well, but Gibbs has been, you know, very shaky to start this season. And, you know, you could definitely see a couple of mistakes made that, you know, especially at one of the worst times. I feel like, you know, he's kind of due for, you know, we may see a speeding penalty out of him. We may see a mistake that drops him back quite a bit. And I think that, you know, that could be his downfall this weekend. But at the same time, this is an opportunity for him and that 54 group to pick it up with at a track that, you know, he can have some success at.
Right. And like I said, it's going to be fun to watch and extremely interesting to see how everything plays out. Like I said, even with Kimi Räikkönen and Jenson Button on the track on Sunday, because this is Kimi's second start, Jenson's first. It's just going to be crazy. There's no other way of saying it.
Absolutely. It's going to be a crazy weekend. So I hope everybody enjoys the race and everybody tunes in, because it's going to be an exciting weekend of racing from all the series, I would imagine.
Right. And see the Echo Park Automotive Grand Prix from Circuit of the Americas is this coming Sunday, March 26th, 3:30 p.m. on Fox. So that is going to be it for today, guys. I hope you guys enjoy and expect more from us in the future. My name is Jacob Barker, and this is my good friend and co-host, Mason Wood. Please, if you can, follow us on social media. Follow me on Twitter at JWBarker24 and on Instagram, same handle. And Mason, with your socials, please.
Yeah, follow me, guys, on Mason Hollywood 6 over on Twitter and Mason.wood01 over on Instagram. I do have Linktree up on my Twitter, so it'll also take you straight to my articles page on Backsports page. So make sure you guys are checking out Mason Wood and Jacob Barker on Backsports page. Check out all of our articles and stuff like that. I like to think we write some pretty good content. I'm very happy with what we put out, especially on the motorsports side. So make sure you guys are checking that out, and all of your support is always appreciated.
Right. Like I said, I hope you guys enjoy it and expect to see more from us in the future. This is going to be fun. I can already tell this is going to be fun. Hope you guys enjoyed. This has been the Outside Line Backsports Page podcast. Hope you guys enjoyed. Have an awesome day, guys. Enjoy.
Peace out.